in our bookstore. She writes a story about a woman whose husband had passed away. And in the following week, suddenly there was lawsuits and counter lawsuits regarding her husband's business and his business partner. And she was feeling just, very angry about the whole thing and resentful about the situation and, of course, the death of her husband. She decided to go to a local church and take part in a prayer group, and she explained her situation. And the prayer group was saying, oh, well, we'll be glad to help you pray for forgiveness about that. And she said, forgiveness? Heck that, I just want to win the lawsuit. And they were encouraging her that, that's probably not the wisest approach to take. But she came back the next week and said she was a little bit more open to that. And then she went home, and she still was feeling resentful. And she kind of just said, God, I humanly cannot forgive this man, but if you can, please forgive him through me. And after she spoke that prayer aloud, she felt an inner peace. The next day, there was a knock at the door, and it turns out it was her husband's business partner. And he, when she opened the door a little bit, he says, I so miss your husband. And she invited him in, and they had some tea and just talked about, the husband and processing the grief of her losing him and the business partner losing his business partner. And they just had a good cry together and all of that. And even though we had pledged not to talk about the situation, she segued into it. And sure enough, between the two of them there, over a very, very short period of time, they were able to come to an agreement about how to move forward, coming out of love rather than fear. And if there is one culprit in having abundance in our lives, it's having resentment or anger towards somebody else or a situation. And I know they may be, come to think of it, they can't possibly be watching at this time in California. But I know my sister lives in California, and my mom's now 87, and she's, her full-time caretaker. And I guess Mom went outside yesterday, or I guess it was the other day, but got into this argument with her neighbor, and she was talking about just that kind of pent-up anger that people are feeling about having their routines shaken up. The Unity movement was started by Charles Fillmore and Myrtle Fillmore. And Charles would spend time every evening in forgiveness, because every day that we live, we usually encounter some sort of situation that we could use the forgiveness tool on. Now, as Elliot mentioned earlier, this is the 7th week of a 7-week series on the spiritual principles of prosperity that Unity has been teaching since back in the 1880s. We've devoted these 7 weeks to developing a prosperity consciousness for we as individuals and for us as a congregation. If you've missed any of the series, the recordings are actually right there on the Facebook page that you're watching right now. After the service, you can check out all 7 weeks of it if you wish. It's based on a class that we offer about once a year called The Keys to the Kingdom, which was written by Reverend David Owen Ritz. And if you'd like to get the class materials, so you can dive into this a little bit more deeply, just go to davidowenritz.com. That's davidowenritz.com. Now, the keys to the kingdom, as I often talk about, when we look in the Gospels especially, there's the kingdom of God and the kingdom of heaven that Jesus talks about. Now, the kingdom of God is that absolute realm that is God. It never changes. It's always there. It's completely dependable. When he mentions the kingdom of heaven, though, you'll see he talks in parables about growth. So the kingdom of heaven is actually our growing awareness that we're spiritual beings having a human experience. So someone asks, which one is it the keys to the kingdom to? I say in some ways it's both. And why 7? Well, the numbers in the Bible have symbolism to them. And the number 6 is the period of work necessary to create something new. And then the 7 is that acknowledgement that you've got completion at the physical world level. And you're ready to ascend to a new level of understanding. So We started with the intention that we would embrace these prosperity principles and move to that new level. We have prosperity in our mind, body, and affairs, so to speak. Now, if you accept that assumption that there is no separation between ourselves and God, there's a quote that's been around for many years. It's been attributed to many people, but the earliest reference is in ancient Greece to Hermes Trismegistus. He says, God is an infinite sphere, the center of which is everywhere, the circumference nowhere. There's no spot where God is not. Every cell of your body is a part of this God presence. And if we can shed that feeling of separation from God, then we recognize we are a part of God, and we actually can pray from the God consciousness in creating the world that we want, rather than feeling we need to beseech some God on a cloud somewhere. Soren Kierkegaard wrote of a metaphor. Imagine that you've been living in a parched desert and you discover that just below you is a water table, and all you needed to do is to sink a pipe and have an artesian well with all the water that you could want. The flow is always there. We're always connected. It's just a matter of being willing to step into that place of humble power so that we can create the world we really want to create. And it takes just changing our mind about a lot of the basic assumptions we've built in life. In the Gospel of John, the 21st chapter, Jesus has been crucified. The disciples are stunned. They just kind of go back to their prior lives. We've got some of them that are fishing on the Sea of Galilee. And all of a sudden, they see on the shore what appears to be Jesus. and Jesus cries out to them and said, "Have you caught any fish?" And they're like, "No." And he says, "Well, rather than cast your net on the left side of your boat, cast your net on the right side of the boat." And we're told that, sure enough, they've got so many fish caught in that net that they had to just bring it ashore rather than try to pull it into the boat. Wonderful Bible symbolism here. The left side, whenever we're using our left hand or whatever, is representative of our emotional and feeling nature. And our right hand is our thinking nature, which is, you recognize, is pretty much of a parallel to that fact that all male characters are thinking nature and all female characters are symbolic of our emotional nature. But think about it. I mean, if these disciples were in grief and just going with emotions, they were not seeing any sort of productivity in their life. It was until they had a chance to see that, hey, Jesus is still there, and go with the thoughts, one of which is faith, and they were suddenly able to have a net full of fish. We have a choice. We are given free will as we enter into this physical world. So, I'm going to ask you 29 questions. I've posted these on Facebook, so you can go over them a little bit later, but these are the questions to kind of, well, I guess it's kind of like a pop quiz of the last 7 weeks of the prosperity series we're doing here with Keys to the Kingdom. But imagine you've got 7 doors in a hallway ahead of you, and that you're earning the key for each of them. So in the first week, we talked about just making the commitment to changing our minds, or changing the assumptions we've got in life. We talked about that if we're committed to our goal, nothing is going to stand in the way. David Owen Ritz talked about how he when he first did this series, he was talking to somebody about 6 weeks in, and the person says, "So you're working the principles?" He goes, "Oh, about 40%. And Reverend Ritz said, "Well, wait a minute here. You know, it's like trying to be 40% pregnant. You know, either you're committed to this or you're not. So be willing to commit to that." And I think of the second Star Wars movie, Episode 5, you know, where Luke Skywalker goes off to that strange planet to find Yoda to teach him, you know, the ways of the Jedi. And he wants to leave, but his boat is sunk in the water. His spaceship is sunk in the water. And so Yoda says, "You know, you've got the power to lift that out of the water." And so Luke says, okay, well, I'll try. And Yoga says, no, you won't try. You either do or you don't do. I mean, you're trying means you've got an inkling in your mind that it's not going to happen. So commitment, especially when it comes to prosperity, is to be willing to live the 4T concept. We've had the banners up here on the wall made by Louis Alvarez. To be willing to tithe of our time, talent, and our treasure. And to be willing to take 10% of our waking hours, say 96 minutes, a cumulative total of 96 minutes, focused on God in some way, whether it's meditation, prayer, reading books, listening to recordings about spirituality, just to allow that to grow in our lives. And then talent, being willing to volunteer. You know, if you're working your typical 40-hour week, you're willing to volunteer 4 hours somewhere on a weekly basis. And then your treasure is being willing to give 10% of your gross income to wherever it is you're getting your spiritual food. And each of these things will start to grow in your life. So here are the questions that we have as far as key number one, as far as commitment. Am I truly committed to realizing the presence of God in my life, rather than simply attaining more material goods? Am I willing to prove my trust in God as my ultimate source by stepping out in faith and trust? Am I ready to believe that my own inner awareness of God can completely make my life better? And am I willing to devote the time necessary to my own spiritual growth? So if you can answer yes to these questions, you've accepted the first key, and that is commitment. So let's open that first door, walk down the hallway. Second week was vision, understanding the vision for our life and holding that vision. We cannot rise higher than our potential. So what is your potential? Here again, we have free choice. And we have this choice in the 5 general categories of our life that we often talk about: health, occupation, relationships, spiritual awareness, and yes, money. The power of connecting this to the physical world by being willing to write down perhaps our own vision or mission statement. Or take a visual representation, vision board, treasure map, wheel of fortune, something like that, where we have a poster board with visual representation of what we want to see and demonstrate in our lives. So here are the questions about number 2. Can I see myself enjoying God's abundance in every area of my life? Do I feel deserving and grateful for the wonderful potential I find within myself? Do I really believe that God wants me to prosper and to succeed in all 5 areas of my life? Am I listening for an inner divine guidance and allowing it to lead me towards the realization of my vision? Am I willing to devote the necessary time to develop and hold my life vision? So if you can answer yes to these questions, you've accepted the second key to the kingdom, and that is to behold a vision for your life. So let's open that door, start moving down the hall. Number 3 was build a new awareness, and that's where we started facing these things, these assumptions or attitudes we've had about life that were formed by our previous experiences, of course, but being willing to shed those things. There are the facts about the world, and there's the truth about the world. Would I rather be right, or would I rather be happy? One of the oddities of living a human life is that we often have to learn who we are by first attempting to be who we are not. To put our hand on a hot stove and understand truly what hot means by burning ourselves, so to speak. So often, especially early in our life, we make mistakes, and it's one of the great blessings of our life, because it is how we learn who we truly are. So the questions. Do I know in my heart that God is the one and only source of my good, acting through many channels in this physical planet? Have I fully accepted the truth that abundance is a here and now reality? Well, that's a interesting one, considering the COVID-19 scare right now. Do I trust that abundance is really inexhaustible? In other words, you having abundance in your life does not subtract from anyone else having abundance in their lives. Do I believe that God is already meeting my needs according to my own level of acceptance? Do I wish for everyone the same abundance that I desire for myself? Have I totally identified with my vision as the real truth of who I was meant to be? If you can answer yes to these questions, you have accepted the third key to the kingdom, and that is spiritual awareness. Number 4 of the 7 is make room for the new. And that was the week where we talked about circulation and just being willing to declutter our lives, clear out the closets in the basement. Also dig a little bit deeper into our own personal finances. It's like, okay, how much are we really clear on our own personal financial plan? Do we have the revenues and looking at how much we have to spend each month? How much debt we have, those sort of things. Just getting clear on what the physical appearances are, and then being willing to open to see those things change for the better. And whatever we give away lovingly and unconditionally, the attitude or energy that we do that with, we start to see a multiplied return of that kind of attitude in our life. So the questions for this one are, do I have a joyful and loving attitude when I am called upon to give? Do I bless the money that flows through my life and share of my good unselfishly? Have I made room in my life for the good that I desire by releasing that which no longer serves me? Do I use tithing to work the law of circulation and honor God as the ultimate source of my good? And I talked about the idea of God being your agent, how athletes and professional musicians, performers, have an agent that usually takes 30, 35%. I mean, if we're just giving 10% away, what better agent to have in your life than God? So if you can say yes to these questions, you have accepted the 4th key to the kingdom, and that is the circulation in life. Number 5 was the little bit trickier one that I kind of touched on with the opening story today, and that's forgiveness, being willing to let go of our past, or what the meaning of that past is. So we release regret, condemnation, guilt, resentment. And like I said, this is the most common area that people get stuck because they're holding some sort of anger. Are we coming from love or are we coming from fear? So the questions in this area is, have I begun to forgive everyone and everything? And here again, it's something we need to do every day. Do I value being free of the past more than I value being right? Am I willing to forgive myself for everything and anything? Am I practicing compassion, love, and acceptance in all my relationships? Do I take time daily to release and resolve my negative and unloving feelings and attitudes? If you can answer yes to these questions, you've accepted the 5th key to the kingdom, which is forgiveness. Number 6, that we covered last week, was counting our blessings and using that tool of gratitude. Notice being willing to put it out there, okay, God, show me the good in this situation, or show me the good in my life. And when we recognize it, being willing to bless it, to actually praise it so that it grows in our life, that we have more good, pleasant experiences. What is your creative energy? What is it that you do really well in the physical world and bringing it to bear on your life? And I talked about how there are 2 layers of gratitude. There's one way of being thankful for something, and then there's the Bible verse about be grateful in all circumstances, so that even when something looks very unpleasant, like, say, a COVID-19 pandemic, the attitude is gratitude. So I am grateful that I'm a spiritual being having a human experience. I'm grateful that I'm divinely guided every day as to what is mine to do and what is mine not to do, what is mine to say, what is mine not to say, what is mine to post, and what is mine not to post. Just being willing to say, okay, this is an unprecedented experience for all of us. And it's an opportunity for each of us to decide, each moment, each day, are we coming from love or are we coming from fear? So the questions from number 6 in gratitude is, do I take the time to notice the good in my life rather than just focusing on the negative part of my life? Do I praise the good I find with my thoughts, words, and actions? Do I share of my good as an expression of my gratitude? Am I willing to see the gift that lies behind every problem and the challenge that comes my way? Am I actively calling forth the hidden good? Okay, God, show me the good in this situation. And if you can answer yes to these questions, you've accepted the 6th key of the kingdom, and that is to gratitude. So here we are in the 7th week. 7th is living in the flow, recognizing that there is an ebb and flow to the life, but we want to, of course, be living in the flow the vast majority of the time. And it's not about just doing, it's about being. You know, we can do prosperity, working with these tools, and there's a difference between that and being prosperity. It's a difference between being a human doing and a human being. Sometimes if we are in a situation where we are not getting the guidance on what to do next, perhaps the best thing we can do is to do nothing until we get the guidance on what we're supposed to do next. Now remember I said that we're earning keys for each door. Well, but when you get to this point, the way you earn this key on living in the flow is just being willing to be prosperous. So let's go ahead and unlock the 7th door and open it up. And as we look behind us, we see a long, open hallway. There are many channels of good that come into our lives. It doesn't have to just be this hallway. It can be one of a number of different channels through which the good comes into our lives. So we're no longer swimming against the current, because that's the right thing to do. No, willing to go with the flow. And understand the power of the phrase, I am. In the book of Exodus, 3rd chapter, 14th verse, Moses is standing before the burning bush, and God is instructing him to go back and tell the people what God has instructed the people to do. And Moses says, well, they're going to want to know which God I'm talking to, since some of them believe in multiple gods. And God said to Moses, I am that I am. And he said, say this to the people of Israel, I am has sent me to you. The two words, I am, and whatever we put behind those two words, is an opportunity for us to identify with the divine or to identify with something else. So what are the words you're putting after the two words, I am? I am healthy. I am prosperous. Or I am sick and tired. Well, no, I'm not. I'm going to deny, dissolve, and release any thoughts or feelings of being sick and tired or angry. So if we are God in expression, we're not all of God, obviously, but we're part of the God presence to express in this world. So in this one, rather than asking you questions, let me give you just some affirmative prayers to use. And like I said, I posted all this on the Facebook page, so you can review it at your leisure. If you're finding that your old doubts and fears are resurfacing, you can pray, I am committed to revealing the good in my life. When you feel like you've lost your way or face a problem or challenge that concerns you, go back to your vision and affirm, I am this vision of wholeness. If you find yourself experiencing lack and limitation, declare boldly, I am relying on the truth that God is my source, not my job, not the government, not my investments. God is my source, and the good will come to me through whatever channel necessary. When you tithe of your time, talent, and or treasure, support each of these acts of giving with the affirmation, I am living in the flow and circulation of God's rich abundance. And when you feel hurt or angry, forgive yourself in the situation by saying, I am love, and I release this feeling of anger with love. And if you notice or as you notice the good that blesses your life every day, bless it with the affirmation, I am grateful for all that I have and all that is coming my way. When we look at these four Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, which start the Christian, scriptures, commonly called the New Testament, Jesus tells a lot of stories, parables. And when you look at his parables, you find out that more than half of them are about prosperity, just getting through the day, having the money that we need and the health and all of the various things that we want in life. And back in the first week of this series, I read this Bible passage, and I thought it's a great way to close out the 7 weeks. It's from the Gospel of Luke, 12th chapter, starting with the 22nd verse. Jesus said to his disciples, "Therefore I tell you, do not be anxious about your life, what you shall eat, nor about your body, what you shall put on. For life is more than food, and the body is more than clothing. Consider the ravens. They neither sow nor reap. They have neither a storehouse or a barn. And yet God feeds them every day. Of how much more value are you than these birds? And which of you, by being anxious, can add a few inches to the span of his life? If then you are not able to do as small a thing as that, why are you anxious about the rest? Consider the lilies, how they grow. They neither toil nor spin fabrics. Yet I tell you, even King Solomon in all his glory was not arrayed as one of these. And if God so clothes the grass, which is alive in the field today and tomorrow is cut down and thrown into the campfire, how much more will he clothe you, O man of little faith? And do not seek what you are to eat or what you are to drink, nor be of anxious mind. For all the nations of the world seek these things, and your Father knows that you need them. But instead, seek God's kingdom, and these things shall be yours as well. Fear not, little flock, for it is your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom. And may you always be open to God's guidance and grace. Let's prepare for meditation.